For a little bit more on this, we're now joined via Zoom by Angelo Fick, who's the Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute in Johannesburg. Angelo, always good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Good evening, Peter.
Great. There'll be quite a bit of debate in terms of the individual names, who was left out and that kind of thing. But looking at it overall, what impression does it give one at first look in terms of fault lines, perhaps, and where the party is heading?
Well, the first question that I think has to be asked is, where are the women? That there are only two candidates and that they're competing for the same position says something about, one, the status of the ANC Women's League, status of the women inside the party, particularly in a party that is governing a society in which women have on paper political equality, but actually in substance live very unequal lives, given femicide and inordinate specters of violence haunting their lives. And so one does have to ask why the African National Congress continues to be so dominated by men in the top six structures. And then the other question one has to ask is, how many of these people actually qualify for SASSA old age pensions? Because if the younger people on the list are all in their 40s, with the exception of Lamola at 39, many people are 48 to 59, between Mabuyane and others. The top officials are all in their 60s. And so this is a party that wants to govern a country in which the majority of people are under the age of 27, in fact, younger than the democratic dispensation. And so this is a party that's staring a demographic crisis in the face and is not blinking. It's simply refusing to transform sufficiently to get younger people in and to be more representative of women. And so how the NEC that backs up these top six officials work out in December is going to be very, very crucial for the party's ability, not just at the level of identity, but at the level of substance, to call upon South Africans in their millions and say to them in 2024, we represent you in your variety, in the way in which you live.
Let's talk about the status of women then, because one would like to think that the branches are half men, half women, and perhaps maybe even more women, who knows? But it seems then that women are voting for men. Is it the quality of the candidates that were put before them that's problematic?
Well, that entirely, of course, is, the workings of any organization. People can only vote for how the organization is constructed, the ability of women to rise in the organization. So there is not a dearth of women in the party, but the fact that in election after election in the post-millennial period, the African National Congress has struggled with this gender question and seems to have gotten worse. So before they had J.C. Duarte as a long-standing veteran in the position of Deputy Secretary General, and it seems as if the party can only accommodate women in that particular position. The fact that no woman made it onto the ballot for the presidency speaks volumes of how these processes are managed. Now, we know that the ANC has problems with branch audits. It's admitted as much. Several of the branches are not ready yet at this late point, so close to the conference. And the numbers tell you that of the nearly 4,000 branches, those numbers do not tally up to, for the presidency position, only about 3,000 of those branches were involved. So there are tough questions the party has to ask itself around the way in which it says it wants to be a forward-looking party, it wants to be the party of the future, and yet in so many respects it remains a party that looks very much like it did 100 years ago, dominated by men in public positions of office, with women in significant positions throughout the party, but getting no further than Charlotte Mkhize did all those decades ago.
So what does it mean when we see people like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was a close second for the president position last time around, now not even getting on the ballot? Does that talk about RET versus CR17/22? What does it tell us?
I think it also tells us something about the visibility that people have in party processes rather than in government processes. So this is somebody who is a senior minister in government, has served in cabinet after cabinet, has come back into South African politics from the AU. So is hardly somebody who is obscured. This is somebody who was visible on a very regular basis during South Africa's pandemic. And yet the branches there couldn't be enough support from the branches to get her on the ballot. And that tells us also something about the country's shift and the ANC shift since 2017. however strongly she came in, just merely missing out on winning that race in 2017, she is now not even featuring on the ballot. Now, this, could be explained by people 10 years from now looking at the processes as historians of how this election in 2022, in December 2022, came about. When they look at branch documents and begin to analyze what happened in these branches, there may be a different story to tell. But for the moment, it does look as if those people who banked on their visibility in government, like Nkosazana Dr. Dlamini Zuma, as well as Lindiwe Sisulu, really didn't feature in branch deliberations enough to be able to be nominated. Now, the question of these candidates who didn't make it onto the ballot will be whether or not they accept this or whether they query, as some people have, the way in which branch processes happened and how they were, shall we say, kept from that. And that kind of Trumpian turn is something that I think the ANC as an organization can ill afford, because you already have people like Lindiwe Sisulu critiquing the president in whose cabinet she serves. You can't now have people questioning, as Nomvula Mokonyane did a few weeks ago, the functioning of the party's mechanisms in public, the way in which she questioned the NEC's workings and their position. Democratic centralism has always been a principle of the ANC, and the question now will be whether these people remain loyal cadres standing behind branch processes as they've come out, or whether they use the internal mechanisms of the ANC to sort out their unhappiness with those processes, or whether they go into a public relations campaign to call into question the processes and the legitimacy by which they ended up not being on the ballot.
Was this then the last throw of the dice for people like Lindiwe Sisulu, Didi Mabuza?
One imagines, but again, there is the process possible of people nominating from the floor at the conference. If 25% of the branches can nominate them, they may still end up being part of that election process. But should the outcome of the December 2022 conference leave them, very low down on the NEC list, if they're at all, one can expect some kind of shuffle in the executive suites of the union buildings. But I also think the ANC is in the process of recognizing, very slowly at the rate of continental drift, that a radical shift is required if it is to survive in electoral politics in any kind of position like it has had over the last 28 years, over the next 10 years. The challenges it faces internally are matched, if not exceeded, by the challenges the country that it governs faces. And so this is a double challenge for an organization that is not only hampered by a century of history and rituals of thought and habits of being, but also by internal strife and internal processes that haven't been managed well, whether it is auditing the branches or whether it is managing the processes that a month before the elective conference, several branches have still not settled their business. And this, I think, is a real concern because, again, the state of the party's finances is something that they also need to be concerned about. This is a party that, in its policy conference a few months ago, faced industrial action from its own workers because it couldn't pay their salaries. And what will happen in December is a big ask. The fact that the Treasurer General overseeing this financial crisis is now being supposedly nominated to be the Deputy President of the party and possibly then the Deputy President of the country and a possible future President of party and country also speaks very, very interestingly about how people in the ANC structures seem to read what can only be referred to as promoting people upwards for less than stellar performance in the positions that they've had.
All right. Do you think that there's still quite a bit that can happen between now and then? I think last minute we had people talking about, I voted for unity. Could we have a moment like that still? Or bar the shouting, bar the potential legal problems, has Cyril Ramaphosa secured his tenure?
Well, the events of 16 to 20 December will tell us whether that security that is signaled by the number of branches supporting him is borne out by the behavior of the delegates at the conference. But I've always held that it is very difficult in a party election, in any organization election, to go up against a billionaire and think that you have a fair chance of beating him. And this is not to cast aspersions on Cyril Ramaphosa's conduct of this. But if you have those resources available to you, you can hire the best people, You can have all sorts of processes and influences moving into branches to make your case for you in a way that candidates who don't come with that kind of financial backing have to do themselves. And this is the problem not just in internal party politics, but increasingly in democratic politics the world over. That those with money seem to be able to do much better because of the nature of political campaigning that has shifted and the way in which information can be distributed using that money across the new technology available to us. How the ANC works this out and whether or not the December conference matches these nomination processes is of course also dependent on how the branches work and whether the delegates sent from the branches vote as they were instructed by their branches, or whether we have, as we've had in other elections in the ANC before, concerns by branch members that the people who arrive at the conference don't hold out the branch mandate and proceed to vote in slightly different ways. And that, I think, is a concern that anybody running on these ballots should have, that the number of branches who support you in the nomination process is not necessarily a guarantee that they will vote for you on the day, on the floor, come that election in December.
Angelo, always good talking to you. Thanks so much indeed. I have no doubt that many stories will still be discussed between now and then. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so there you have it. That was Angelo Fick, Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute in Johannesburg, analysing for us the ANC's nomination list for the top 6 positions.